Hey, we're on a job site. You can see this is a patch area. There's a fracture here and that. We can cut out this area. You can cut it out, 2 foot by 3 foot area, but then it turns into a big patch. This patch isn't totally broken, so we can get away with just digging out V-notch in the fracture here, taping it, and then I can use this big knife. This is a big texture knife, and I can literally float out this whole area with mud. But let's get started on it. With any of these fractures, I always like to V-notch it, so I take the crack at a 45 degree, and then I like to cut it out. I do the one side. You're gonna take your time with this razor blade. Then you V-notch it out, and you go all the way down. And you take a 6-inch knife and you scrape it. So now you left a channel there. Then you follow through on the rest of the crack, and you do the same thing. With this, we got lucky. We were able to save the patch, not have to cut out a big section of drywall. If you're able to do good mudding and stuff like that, you're able to fix and save stuff like that. So now that I got it dug out, I like to throw a few screws. This is probably a stud right here, so I like to tighten it up. Throw a few screws in, right along the stud here. Sometimes here I could even put a piece of wood in there, but it doesn't really need it. It always helps videos. I use my fiberglass tape. I always use fiberglass tape on repairs. So you just follow your V-notch crack that you cut out. You're just basically fiberglass in the seam, fiberglass, fiberglass. Follow it down. This gap over here is a little bigger, so you can even double layer your fiberglass. 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. It doesn't hurt. Sometimes your fiberglass, it doesn't like to stick to these old walls, so you can use a spray glue to stick it to it, or you just push it down. Follow through with a 6. Everything's fiberglass. I'm gonna follow through here because it kind of turns, so I put a piece there and a piece there. It doesn't hurt. So we don't have to cut out a whole section of drywall. We got the fracture, it just barely dimpled in. The drywall, it didn't totally break. If it would have broken in completely, then we'd have to cut it out, but right now it's just gonna be an easy, savable thing. We're gonna go mix some 5-minute mud, and now we're gonna coat that whole. I got a little more than a half a pan. I think this is a little too much, so I'm just gonna take a little bit out. So about a half a pan. I do use a bigger pan. This is an 18-inch pan. Like I said in the other videos, they have a 12-inch pan, a 14-inch pan, and an 18-inch pan. They even have a 22-inch pan. I like to use the bigger pan. This is meant for a texture knife, so I can fit all my knives in this basic pan right here, and I can mix a nice, healthy batch of muds with the bigger pan. But you just use a pan that you're comfortable with. Sometimes a beginner pan, you just need a cheap little 12 or 14-inch pan would be good enough for simple do-it-yourself projects. But with this 5-minute, like I said, I like to mix some fresh water in it and just toss and turn, mix it up thoroughly. I usually do about a half a pan. I'll start with a scoop of water, maybe another sponge full of water, 1 to 2 sponges to get it going. Right here it's a little dry, so I'll just put another handful of water in the corner where it's the dry mix. And you just keep mixing and mixing. You can always add a little more water or a little more powder to get the thickness you need. The first coat, we always want it thick. We want it thick, but we still get our 5-minute mud. I like to always take my 6-inch knife and I like to strike in the tape areas, and I like to push down hard to get that mud inside the gap, especially in the V-notch gap. This basically works like a pre-fill to get inside the gap. Now that we got that lined up, we can take our bigger knife. I'm using my 12-inch knife. I'm basically going to put the materials on the wall. Put the materials on the wall. Put them on the wall. I usually use what I got in the pan, get all my materials on the wall, and I'll feather the sides. Sometimes here where it's deep, I'll put extra materials. I'm going to feather the side here. I'm going to take the corner bead. This is a round bullnose corner bead. So all my materials I want in the center where it's really deep in the patch. So now I got my big knife. This is just a basic texture knife, and I follow it through. Up, down. Then you can come back up. You can go sideways, whatever it takes. Right there you can see it's still kind of deep in the area, so I can take my excess materials and put it back on there. So that's a nice first coat. It's pre-filled, V-notched, put some screws in it, fiberglass tape, strike in the tape with 5-minute, do a nice heavy first coat. So it's a nice 2 to 5 minutes. I want to come back in here and check on my first coat. It's still damp, but it's set up enough, so I want to do the same thing. Take my damp sponge. I like to get rid of my edges, then I go over it center. Just get it wet, take your nice clean 6-inch knife, then just follow through. You're just taking off the excess mud, pushing it down, get it where it needs to go. You got mud there, sometimes you can take that extra mud and cross it off. Now I'm gonna go this direction, this direction, this direction. So you can see just with one nice coat of mud on it, left it fairly heavy, slick it out with this sponge. It's almost ready for texture, just like that. But I'm gonna go ahead and let this set up for another minute while I mix another pan of 5-minute mud, and then we're gonna do the second coat process. You can tell already that's looking good. Go ahead and mix some second coat mud. I don't need as much as the first coat, so just less than a half a pan. Always keep my lids on my bucket because I don't want to get water droplets inside the mud. Then I'll have little rocks set up. Same thing here. Let's start with one good healthy sponge. Then we'll mix it up, toss and turn, side to side, whatever it takes. Everybody has their own methods of hand mixing 5-minute muds or quick step muds. There's no right or wrong way. The only way is not to make a mess. Keep the mud and water in the pan, and that's the proper way. We want to get this water nice and turned in here and get it mixed up. Once the water activates it, it activates the hot mud. So once it starts mixing with water, we have about 5 minutes total work time with this mud. So we like to work the mud, get it mixed up, get it on the wall, and get the tools mixed up before the mud sets up. So right now it's pretty thick, it's really heavy mud. I like to, for my second coat mud, I like it just a little bit thinner than my first coat mud. So I'm gonna just add a little more water, sprinkle it in, just mix it up. I'm making a nice clean coat mud. It's gonna be nice and nice and nice. This is mixed. Sometimes you wanna scrape the sides of your pans, scrape the edges, scoop, scrape, get all that dry powder mixed in there. So now I got this mixed up. I'm gonna just take my basic 12-inch knife, and I'm also take this big knife just in case I need it, because it is a deep patch and I want to flood it in here. We're gonna do a second coat on patch. I want to do a nice healthy full patch of mud, full patch of mud, full patch of mud. I want to basically use up all my mud on my pan and fill in that patch. It is still kind of deep right here in the middle part, so I like to feather the edges, Take that extra mud and I just put it right on the center, right on the center. On the first coat I went up and down, but this way I'm just gonna cross it off, go this direction. I'm using a big knife. You don't necessarily have to use a big knife. I just want to put a lot of material on this big ugly patch. And sometimes you can follow through. Since it is on the corner bead, I start on the corner bead and work my way down. So there you go, nice healthy second coat. We're gonna let that set up. My excess mud I'm gonna dump. Let that set up for about 5 minutes. We're gonna wet sponge it, slick it out, and get it ready for texture. The texture here, it's nothing special. It's just a skip trowel. Basic skip trowel. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So we gotta do an up and down skip trowel pattern. We're just going to check on our second coat mud. It's still kind of damp, but it's good enough to work with the wet sponge. Same thing, we hit the edges with the damp sponge, hit the edges. And we're basically trying to get rid of that edge, so there's not a sharp edge in there. We always get rid of the edges. Then I kind of just glide over the patch. And I take my clean 6 and same thing. Work the mud, work the mud, work the mud. We're taking off the excess mud, taking off the excess mud. And it's basically going through here and taking off the excess mud, slick it out, all that extra mud here. Take that mud, get it out of my work area. I can also cross it off. Sometimes I just like to double check my sponge. And then we can even go this direction. Cross it off. That way we know it's getting filled in each direction. Filled in, filled in, filled in. So it's a nice patch. Now you can tell after just 2 coats of mud and slicking it out twice, it's a really nice clean patch. Now we gotta do the texture process of skip trowel. So I'm gonna let that dry for a few minutes and let this fully cure. It is starting to dry, but I want it to be fully dry before I do the skip trowel. So let's just give this a couple minutes, let it fully dry, and then we're gonna go mix up our texture mud to do the skip trowel. Stomper, I grab my bucket of texture. This is the same bucket I just used on my last job with the lid on top. I really didn't put any water on top, but before any patch job or any job, I always like to mix up my mud to creamy it back up, make sure it's all nice and consistent and nice creamy texture. So with that said, it's all mixed up. This isn't a fairly large patch. I am gonna be skip troweling my 6. So inside my water bucket, I always have my sanding sponge. I always like to clean my 6-inch knife. Sometimes you get little goobers and dabbers and they pull scratches, so I like to sand my knife with this sanding block. It's just basically a wet sanding. If your knife is really bad, you can take some 80 grit and really sand it. Sometimes you do it on a smooth cement and that gives it a nice clean knife. But I just take the sanding block every once in a while and I just clean my knives. If it gets any goobers, like right here I have some Kills paint on it, it'll get that paint right off. Maybe just a little bit of elbow grease, it makes a nice clean knife. You follow through with a sweat sponge, clean your knife off, and look at that, I got a nice clean knife ready to go. So this patch isn't fairly large, so I'm just gonna need a couple scoops of mud. And whatever we don't use, we can dump back in our bucket. It is a hot, sunny day, so I always like to keep my lids on my bucket. I don't want my mud to dry. Sometimes I just toss up the mud a little bit, get some mud on my knife, that way my knife's ready to go. There's always a curve in these knives. This one's just a barely curved, but I like to put the curved edge against the wall, and then the deep edge is your finger knife. So the second coat mud's pretty dry. The patch is looking really good. It's starting to be dry enough for texture. So now we're gonna do the skip trowel process. Like the previous videos, I can dip or I can scoop. Most guys will be better at dipping. You can see the mud, how it's not falling off the knife. It's a nice thick mud, like a really, really thick pancake batter. But with me, I've been doing texture so long, I can actually do this scooping method. It's just nice, consistent. The mud's pretty much the same on the knife. This texture here, it's an up and down skip trowel, so I start on the edges. Basically going with the flow of the existing skip trowel, you can kind of mimic the pattern that they already have there. So I start on the outside texture. And go down the corner bead. Go down the corner bead. A lot of guys like to use that big knife that I use to float out this patch, but sometimes doing these patches with a skip trowel, it's sometimes easier to use just a 6-inch knife so you can get a nice pattern. You just go nice and slow, nice and slow. We're not in a hurry here, so going nice and slow, it'll do a nice skip pattern. Especially with this existing, it's really heavy. That's a heavy skip trowel. So sometimes to get that heavy skip trowel, you have to do a double skip, double skip, double skip. We're just basically skipping over that same areas twice. And we just take the patch, we always take the patch a few inches or a foot past the actual patch area to give it a good blending. Good blending. Good blending. Take it down past the patch. Put a little bit in the center here. You just kind of stand back, so make sure that it's all textured good. Sometimes you can go the other direction off the corner bead, because the corner beads are always deep, so the mud doesn't like to flow the same as a flat wall. Sometimes when you do these marks, you can take the mud off there, and then you can follow it through with some more skip trowel on top to blend it in, blend it in, blend it down, trowel it down, trowel it down. Take a look at my patch. That's a nice, perfect patch. Have a look at my patch, make sure it's all good. Got my area all cleaned up, so it's a nice looking patch. Existing textures matched. It's good to go. Good job. For my extra mud, I just dump in my bucket, scrape my sides, take the damp sponge, wipe the sides, just leave a little bit of water on top, just barely enough water to cover the top of the mud. That's called capping your texture. So now it's good for the next job for tomorrow. Basically set myself up for tomorrow, I clean out my tools, get some fresh water, and that's pretty much it for the job today. So then I'll be set up for myself tomorrow.